and welcome to the Brodsky Brief. I'm Jerry Brodsky, your host. This podcast is a space where we break down complex projects, real-world risks, dispute resolution, and the lessons that come from working through high-pressure situations. The goal of this podcast is simple. We take conversations that normally happen behind the scenes, behind closed doors in construction and development projects, and make them understandable and useful for a broader audience. Today's episode is called Decoupling Lessons from the Ditch. And no, this is not a session about divorce or anything like that. Decoupling is, we're going to give it a little bit of a different meaning. And the word the ditch, I will let my guest explain where that comes from because it was her term. And what we're talking about is what happens when a major project becomes stalled by disputes, and why separating project delivery from the resolution of those financial disputes can sometimes make the difference between progress and paralysis. Today, I am so delighted to be joined by Tracey Haley. Tracey and I first crossed paths during one of the most complex infrastructure situations either of us had worked on at the time, and it was related to the Panama Canal expansion, aka the ditch. It was back in 2013. We really didn't know each other personally yet. Tracey had heard of me through a colleague in Miami that I also know very well. And it was a couple of days before Thanksgiving, I remember, because I was in trouble with my family for being at work. Made a call, and that somehow led to a conversation that eventually turned into working together in the middle of a massive international dispute. It was, like I said, 2 days before Thanksgiving, and I got the call. Hi, is this Jerry? This is Tracey. I'm working on a major infrastructure project, and I need help. And that's how it started. Tracey, thank you for joining me. Thank you for being my first guest in the podcast. I couldn't have picked a better guest than somebody that has meant so much for me throughout my career. Thank you so much again for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Jerry. Delighted to be here.
Thank you again. So before we get into the lessons of the Panama Canal, and the idea of decoupling the disputes that we're going to be talking about, I'd like to give a little bit of your background and how your career led you to these kinds of mega high stakes projects where we were dealing with political issues all over the world. Give us a short version of your background and what do you do today, Tracey?
Well, the short version is I got out of law school and wanted to be a criminal prosecutor, but no one was hiring. So I did criminal defense work, primarily defending counterfeiters. It was an interesting time, but not too long after that, I moved in-house working for a surety company, which for most people, they don't even know what that is. And the brief explanation is you can't really insure the completion of a project, be it a highway or something bigger, but you can put a bond on it. That construction bond is a surety bond, and they needed help handling those claims along with their fidelity claims, which is why I got pulled into it. Originally, I was told that the girls did fidelity and the guys did construction. So I had to kind of break that mold for while I was there, but they had so much construction going on, I stepped right into it. And I did it for about 30 years, actually. So I was handling it when I left there, the construction surety, the fidelity, the trade credit, and the political risk. And now I am at Markel Surety, and I've been here about 3 years, absolutely loving it.
Great. And that's we met when you were at your prior employer, which was the surety for the Panama Canal expansion. What prepared you the most for handling such high pressure situations? I mean, you and I were there, and I've never been in a pressure cooker that's been that intense in my career. And you have to be prepared for that. So I'm curious, what do you think prepared you for that?
I'd like to say it was that great legal training, but it wasn't. I think growing up with your dad being a military officer, living all over the world, a lot of places that people didn't like us, was a very good background for walking into a room of people that probably didn't like us.
That I'm very familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've asked myself the same question: what prepared me? And yes, of course, there's a legal training and there's all of that academics, but it's the curiosity and the I think problem solving. You have a complex problem and you figure out how to solve it with the resources that you have, with the constraints that you have. And to me, that's a creative exercise, and that's I think what you and I did back in the ditch in 2013 and 14.
We ask a lot of questions, right? Just trying to get answers.
And trying to get at what was the real problem. And that's not common to the Panama Canal. We eventually got to the real problem, and once we did, we were able to find a solution. But the same thing happens everywhere. What most recently has caught my interest and brought me back to this subject is a project that's very close to where I live, down here in Miami, where they're building a art in public places project in connection with the expansion of the 395 I-95 intersection. And there's this beautiful one, at least in drawings, arches design that reminds me of that thing that I think I mentioned in the movie Contact, that Jodie Foster was in it. But it kind of looks like that, except that it's been late and it's been the subject of significant disputes. It creates a eyesore instead of a beautiful structure as it was designed to be. But more importantly than everything, it's the impact that it has on traffic congestion, the eyesore, and all of that. It's a quality of life issue. Mm-hmm. And I'm not involved in that project, but all I can see is that the technical issues appear to be resolved and the financial issues appear to be driving completion of the project. And that's when decoupling, I think, needs to come into play. So when projects stall like this, like the Panama Canal stalled in 2013 when it came to a halt, with 70% of the project done, who suffers the most? Who are the ultimate victims of this, of those kind of disputes and situations?
I don't think it's unlike your arches, right? It was supposed to do one thing and it's not doing it. What it is doing is something else. So yeah, they stall, and you would think it would be, if you talk to the contractor, they're the ones suffering because they're not presumably getting paid or they're owed money. If you talk to the owners of those projects, they think they're the ones suffering because their project's not done. But the reality is, it's generally another third party. It's the intended beneficiary, not to get all legal, but that's what we call them. That's the owner of the project eventually. So for the Panama Canal, half of the world's economy runs through that canal. And if it were expanded, it would be faster, better for everybody. So that was why the original 5 development banks came together to fund it. So yes, there were unintended consequences on this project, but the ones that suffered, the financiers, the people trying to transport goods through this canal, and ultimately every consumer on the planet was not getting what they wanted or what they thought they were going to be getting at the price at the time they expected to get it.
And I agree with you 100%. It's those that are not at the table that end up stuck with the consequences many times.
Right.
And one group that I think came together in back when we were dealing with the ditch was the group of Panamanians, because we spoke to them and we said, look, at the end of the day, when all of this is said and done, the ones that are going to be stuck with either a canal that's open and generating, I don't know, 70% of your economy, or not, and that is going to depend on all of you. And you're the ones that are going to have to explain to your kids why it happened or why it didn't happen. And I think that struck a chord. That's when I think you and I began thinking about, do we really have this huge iceberg of a problem, or is there a smaller problem that we can solve that gets the project back going, gets it to the finish line, and reduces the damage, the size of the problem for everybody. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when the decoupling notion came into our radar screen in Panama.
Right. We can't underestimate the power of nationalism, right? It is a driving force. And you ran that meeting. I wasn't Panamanian. I didn't get to go. Of just the Panamanians trying to impress upon them or remind them that those lawyers that kept flying in every Monday and flying out on Thursday, they were going to fly out forever one day, right? They weren't going to live with this. They weren't going to have to answer for it. So I think that message was very galvanizing. I think it didn't push them to a single resolution. It just pushed them through to knowing it could happen. It was going to be finished.
Yeah, agreed. I think that, as I recall, the purpose of that meeting was to ignite precisely what you said, nationalism. Get the Panamanians on all sides to say, wait a second, we need to fix this, because if not, the problem's going to be huge. We're going to be in a heap of trouble for many, many years. So igniting that was important, but then we had to give them a formula for how to get out. And that, I remember it, Tracey, like it was yesterday. You and I were sitting in the lobby of that Westin hotel, which is close to the entrance to the canal area. We were sitting in the lobby, there were like computers, and we were just walking around. How can we've got this $1 billion problem, $1 billion plus problem, and no appetite on anybody's side to address that as part of the solution to get the project back on track. And that's when I remember us talking, well, do we really need to fix this whole problem, this whole financial dispute, in order to get this project to the finish line? And that was the moment you and I started talking about decoupling. That night, that evening, we wrote a one-page memo. I still have it somewhere in my archives in my computer. That was the outline of the MOU that got a little bit of money and a little bit of money from each side, a contribution that got the project to the finish line. Tracey, that saved the canal, as I recall.
I remember us sitting there, and I don't know what hour of the morning that was, but we said, this just isn't working, right? Everyone's focused on blame. They're not focused on problem solving. And I kind of laughed and I said, if this were a divorce in the U.S., we would say, what's in the best interest of the children? And under a divorce setting, the two parents can be very unhappy, but that kid still has to go to school, got to have clothes, lunch money the next day. And we both kind of joked about it and said that's really where we're trying to get them to refocus. Less on their own interests, their own issues, their own problems, and more on getting this project done.
And Tracey, what do you think, in your opinion, what's the most difficult challenge to get parties to make that switch from we've got to solve the huge iceberg or nothing to wait a second, let's do this little bitty piece first? And what does it take to switch the mood and the momentum of a massive dispute like that to begin a different approach? Is it trust? What's the biggest hurdle?
I think when they are this size, or even not this size, but big disputes, either projects or money or politics or whatever, there's always some distrust in there. So trying to build that trust in that environment never works. So I usually start off and get them to stop assigning blame. And in fact, I'll joke with them and say, every time you assign blame, I'm going to raise my hand and say, that was me. And you can just assign it here, but now we're not here to assign blame. We're going to problem solve. And once they understand the ground rule, and I try and make that as light and kind of funny, I'll confess to any of those things, right? Of what I might have done.
Whatever it takes.
It doesn't matter. Lindbergh kidnapping. I was there. It's a really dark night. Whatever. But once they realize they can't do that and can't point to the other person, they've actually got to come together and refocus on something else. At least a dialogue starts, and we begin working a little slower toward the right focus.
And not trying to move the iceberg.
No.
That's I think that's all of those elements came together, and it worked. Certainly worked because the MOU was signed, because the project was completed, and as far as I know, they're still doing arbitrations in Miami over the disputes, trying to resolve the financial issues. But the toll booth is working, and that's the key. That's really the key.
The world's largest toll booth is going well.
And there's no quick pass for that one.
That's right. Not Disney World. Oh, we wish.
Tracey, I've been thinking about this decoupling concept and trying to decide whether it has any application on the private side. And I think it does, particularly in situations where you build something private and there's a third party that's going to be the ultimate beneficiary. Being in Miami, being in South Florida, condominiums are the obvious thing that comes to mind. And it also happens, and we're reading about a notorious tower right now that's really troubled in Miami, a condominium high-rise that has, I think it's sold out. All of the units are sold out because it was one of those fancy ones. And there are major disputes about fraud, about all of the nastiest things you could file in court. And those disputes are going to delay this project, or stand the risk of delaying this project. And the people most affected are the ones that are not going to get their units delivered on time. So that's what popped the idea of decoupling into the private setting. What if contract requirements on the private side prioritize the completion of the project using all of the resources available, sureties, insurance, everything, with the final reconciliation to be done at the end, once the people are living in their units? Do you think that has any value or validity on the private side? Because I know that on the public side, we made it work, and so we know it does.
I do think it has a lot of really good ideas in there, because it does keep the money flowing in some respects to get those projects solved. But I caution when we get into that topic about, are they just going to adopt some of the other things we have, like the forced work provisions? Again, in some contracts, the owner of the contract can say, if there is a dispute over something, we can force you to do the work at a certain price and then work the rest of it out on the back end. That has worked in some places, but I caution my own contractors now when they get into those situations, that is not the perfect answer. A negotiated resolution to those, as long as it's timely, is probably your better choice, because those almost always guarantee you're going to have a fight at the end.
Sure.
But it does get the work done, so I like that part. So I go back to what our industry has been trying to do, which is be more proactive in performance situations. We handle payment bonds as well, but they have a different pace and a different focus than a performance obligation. And trying to, as you suggest, bring that to bear.
And that's actually, that was going to be my next question. How do you think the industry will react? And you have the contractors sector, you have the surety and insurance sector, to a change, perhaps a change in the way contracts are written on the public side and on the private side, where by requirement, be it law or a private contract, the project comes first. And regardless of fault, all of the resources available, including surety bonds, including insurance and everybody, with a full reservation of rights to then rebalance and reconcile at the end once the project is finished. I can imagine all sorts of resistance from all sides to putting money up front and then trying to recover it later. But in a long-term macro view, I think that this has, at least it's worth exploring. What do you think?
Oh, I do think it's worth exploring. Now, it can be done informally now. Sureties have done this before. I have told many disputed two parties, you think it's X and you think it's Y. I'm going to put the money in from this surety bond and we're going to finish the project. And at the end of the day, one of you will win and one of you will lose. The loser's paying me back. And if the loser's not the principal, we've got an indemnity agreement. So that complicates it, but the premise is the same. The money is going in, somebody's going to end up paying for it in the end. We're just the stopgap mechanism. And it wasn't too long ago. I'm going to say more than 5 years ago. The industry was drafting an advance payment bond, not in the sense of something being shipped back and forth.
Right.
But it was a bond for large projects that had a liquidity provision. And I want to say 25%. You could trigger up to a certain amount of it to do just this very thing. But it did encounter resistance from contractors and from owners.
Well, yeah, that's understandable. But if in the end it reduces the financial fight, the size of the financial fight, because you got the project going and you got the revenue going, whatever it is, then you would, logic tells me that that's better for everybody at the end.
Agreed.
Tracey, before we finish, I'm going to hit you with a rapid fire couple of questions that I'd like you to answer if you can. First one, what's the biggest risk that people underestimate in major projects, in your experience?
I see the risk as threefold: time, scope, and money. And I think we generally get time wrong. We're pretty good at controlling scope because we got lawyers. And we're pretty good at controlling money because we have more lawyers and more finance people. But the time element as humans, we're just not good with. We can estimate, but it's the hardest of the ones to control sometimes.
And when confronted with that major issue or any major issue, in your experience, what's the mistake you see most commonly repeated by anybody, by the parties involved?
As it concerns time or just anything?
In general.
Oh, they spend way too much time blaming each other. That is a useless exercise.
I was hoping you would say that, because it was when we were able to change that dynamic in Panama. That's when it really turned. That's when discussions began to be, what if? Not it didn't become a kumbaya. It never has.
Oh, no.
It will.
No.
But when we got there, they were not even talking about what ifs. They were making T-shirts for the next one, and they were already way past. We had, apparently the point of no return. But by rebuilding trust and focusing on a smaller problem, I think we're able to convince them that it was in everybody's best interest to do that.
Yes. We defined a very narrow course that everyone agreed, if we could hold it, would get to the finish line. We just had to insulate it from the noise of the political pressure and the financial pressures to get that moving. And once they saw 2 or 3 milestones being hit, the mood changes, right?
Yeah.
And I remember how hard you worked on getting those first milestones together. And I was the crabby client going, can you go faster? We are really in a hurry here. But you were very focused on those milestones have to be achievable and visible, something we can wave a flag over, because we've got to develop the momentum in the back room with the project executives and in the field, because the whole country was wanting progress.
They were out in the streets, as I recall. We were 6 months away from an election, and the labor unions, there were 10,000 people out in the streets because of all of the unpaid bills that were accumulated on that project. It was, I don't know about you, but it's the only project that I've ever been involved with where we had paparazzi chasing us every time we came out of a meeting, and we had to duck the press and all of that. It was really a career-changing experience.
But it was also a very human experience on the ground, right? There's 18,000 guys working every day. When the work stops, it becomes very human. We finished that one meeting and drove back, and the nuns from the local convent had chained themselves to the gate of the project in solidarity with those workers.
Yeah.
And it was hard not to think at that very moment, this is a human story. This is really impacting people one-on-one. And we got to get out of the big room with the executives and really sell this as progress to those folks.
I remember what impacted me the most. I remember we did that tour. It was like a 4-hour tour of the canal they gave us the first day. The silence is what impacted me.
Yeah.
There was dead silence in a huge, interminable project line of sight.
Yes.
And you could just see it was like tears flowing from the project.
Every batch plant I've ever been to, I've needed like earmuffs because of the heavy equipment. And this was the world's largest batch plant making concrete on site. We could have a conversation just like we are now in the middle of mountains and mountains of basalt.
Yep. Well, Tracey, we're getting to the end of today's podcast. I want to ask you one final question. Let's see, if there's a lesson that leaders should take from situations like the one we faced in Panama or other distressed projects, what would that be?
I think it's decisiveness. I think you've got to have leaders that will make decisions. And then they've got to communicate that in a way that says desire and doesn't impose fear. Because we had a lot of fear on this project. And we kept saying to them, your desire for this project to finish has got to be greater than your fear of failure. If your fear of failure is that great that you can't refocus on the desire, then you can't communicate that and you can't make the right decisions. And we were blessed on both sides with people who could make decisions. And they did, thoughtfully.
Eventually.
And they did. Eventually. It takes time. But they did. It took great risk on all parts. But they made those tough decisions. They communicated them well. And it all got done.
And Tracey, that will be an experience and a time of my life that I will always cherish, because professionally I think that it's perhaps something that I've been involved that had the most impact in the world. And we did. I remember everybody was looking at this project. I don't know if you remember the first WikiLeaks explosion came out during the project, and there were emails that were the U.S. government was monitoring this project because it was so important. And that just elevated the gravity and the pressure of the situation that we were in. It marked my career. It working with you was one of the best experiences that I've ever had.
And for me with you, Jerry. It was great.
And that's why I'm so blessed and so thankful that you were happy to join me today. I want to thank you. This has been a great experience. I will learn from it and continue. I hope that we continue our bond of friendship and that our paths continue to meet in the future. Tracey, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry.
This has been the Brodsky Brief. Real conversations about real strategy, conflict, and what it actually takes to keep projects moving towards completion when they are under pressure. You can follow us on Spotify and on YouTube for future episodes. Thank you for listening.